Konami is no stranger to great shoot-em-ups. This is the company that gave us Gradius, one of the greatest action game franchises to come out of the 1980s. And really, that's just the tip of the iceberg, as Konami is also known for shooter series like Salamander, Parodius, and Twin Bee, not to mention one-off classics like Axlay. So, when they heralded their newest game, CYGNI, All Guns Blazing, as the vanguard of next-generation shoot-em-ups, believe me when I tell you that Konami is one of the very few companies that could back up that kind of overconfident boast. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the game actually delivers on that hype, but I definitely went in hoping that it would be the return to form for a company that is so vital to the history of the shooter genre. Is this really the next generation shoot 'em up that we've all been waiting for? Find out now when I review CYGNI, All Guns Blazing. The name may be different, but it's the same old shoot 'em up song and dance. When an Earth colony on the planet CYGNI is decimated by a powerful biomechanical alien race, it's up to a small group of daredevil pilots to push back the surprise attack and end the war once and for all. They'll fight through 7 increasingly challenging stages, all wrapped together using gorgeous cinemas and a surprisingly wordy story. Yes, you've been here before. It has the same story as hundreds of other shoot-em-ups, and the biomechanical robots are straight out of the Matrix. The gimmick here isn't originality, but rather a stunning next-generation presentation. From strictly a visual perspective, CYGNI is easily one of the prettiest shooters to ever hit the market. It's full of absolutely massive boss fights and stunningly detailed backgrounds. But does it have more to offer than just killer graphics? Fortunately, the answer is yes. Sort of. While the gameplay doesn't exactly reinvent the wheel, there are a few ideas here that set it apart from the other vertical shooters on the market. For one thing, you can aim the firepower a few degrees to the right and left using the right analog stick, helping you to take out the enemies that are trying to attack on all sides. You can also switch to homing shots, which will target different enemies with about half of your shots. This is incredibly handy as the enemies begin to fill up the screen, giving our hero nowhere to move. What's more, the ship that we're flying can target the ground with a powerful laser attack, similar to the classic game Xevious. This forces you to keep track of 2 different layers at once, both the background and the foreground. By far the most unique element of the game involves the shield. For the most part, the shield does exactly what you expect it to do. It keeps your ship safe. However, you can prioritize firepower of the shield at a push of a button, making your attacks more powerful at the expense of leaving your ship a little bit more vulnerable. But watch out, because with so many different enemies and bullets clogging up the screen, it's just insanely easy to get hit. So you're going to want to pick up all the items in order to refill your shield. The items that you pick up when your shield is actually full will become cash that you can spend to upgrade your ship and firepower between levels. That's pretty cool, but we're going to talk more about that in a moment. Now, the real star of the game are the 7 levels, all of which are stunning to look at. That's going to be the first thing that you notice when playing CYGNI. The second thing you're going to notice is how long the first level is. Clocking in at more than 15 minutes, the opening stage has us fighting 3 incredible bosses, each bigger and more impressive than the last. In pretty much any other shooter, this would have been 3 separate stages. But here we are, thrown into one of the most intense introductions that I've ever seen. If this was just the first level, then I couldn't wait to see how the rest of the game would top it. Sadly, the opening stage set my expectations a little too high, because nothing ever tops it. Don't get me wrong, the rest of the game is a lot of fun and you'll marvel at a lot of the boss fights, but most of the levels are considerably shorter and more straightforward. In fact, that first stage is the only part of the game that has multiple bosses in the level. I hate to say it, but a lot of the game's best moments are found in the first 15 minutes, which is usually the opposite of what you expect from this type of shoot 'em up. And that's not the only problem plaguing CYGNI. One of the go-to staples of a shoot-'em-up is picking up different weapons and power-ups as you go along. Unfortunately, there's nothing like that here. The items that the enemies drop are used exclusively to fill up your shield and to buy new abilities between levels. And that wouldn't be so bad if the different weapons and abilities that you bought in the upgrade shop offered a nice variety, but that's not the case. The different weapons are all basically the same with some minor changes. This game does allow you to switch between multiple loadouts mid-battle, but why bother? Just imagine being able to switch between a spread shot, a flamethrower, lasers, and more types of firepower. Ugh, talk about a huge missed opportunity. Speaking of which, the air-to-ground laser attack is also disappointing. Sure, it gets the job done, and it's fun to see the enemy units on the ground blow up real good. But this part of the game feels like an afterthought. The problem with the ground laser is that you can only shoot one weapon at a time. This means that you'll spend most of your time on the enemies that are right in front of you, as there are way more of them and they tend to be a lot more aggressive. There are a lot of times in this game where there's just too much happening on screen to even consider using the ground laser. And it's clear the developers must have realized that this was going to be a problem because they've included sections where the only enemies are on the ground, finally giving you a chance to pull that other trigger button. However, these sections become fewer and fewer as the game goes along, and some levels barely include the ground units at all. Look, I hate to say it, but CYGNI reminds me a lot of the classic game Sylph Heat on the Sega CD. When that game was getting ready to come out back in 1993, Sega hyped it up as the next generation shooter that would change the genre forever. Unfortunately, despite being a perfectly fun and exciting action game, Sylph Heat was never going to be able to live up to expectations. It was, for better or worse, a fairly standard vertical shooter with fancy polygonal graphics that just so happened to be in the background. In other words, it was the same old game with a fresh paint job. The same is true today. The only thing next generation about this game is the presentation. And you know, it's not just a good-looking game, but it's also an intense one. The game does an excellent job of throwing what feels like hundreds of enemies at you at once, filling up every inch of the screen with bad guys to shoot. From that perspective, CYGNI All Guns Blazing is an impressive action game. Is it truly the vanguard for the next generation of shoot 'em up? No, certainly not. But it is still a lot of fun. CYGNI touts itself as the next generation shoot 'em up, and from a visual perspective, it succeeds. From the massive bosses to the attention to detail in the backgrounds, this is a graphically stunning game that'll impress you from beginning to end. But while the game goes all in when it comes to visual splendor, the same cannot be said for the rest of the experience. This is a fairly straightforward vertical shooter that doesn't do a whole lot to shake up the genre cliches. The weapons are boring, the upgrade shop is lacking, and some of the best ideas, like shooting enemy units on the ground, feel like an afterthought. Sure, CYGNI All Guns Blazing is the same old shoot 'em up with a fresh coat of paint. But man, that sure is a good looking paint job. Hey, thanks for watching my review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What kind of shooter do you prefer? Vertical or horizontal? Most of the time, I think I'd go with horizontal. But games like CYGNI kind of sell me on vertical, especially when they use up the full widescreen. Let me see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, it sounds like Nintendo might be ready to announce more Nintendo Switch Online games this week, so look for a review crew episode. We'll also have a review of Shadow of the Ninja Reborn. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,